You know when you hear a voice that just has a certain something? It's a quality you can totally feel, but man, it's hard to describe, right? Well, today we're actually going to go on a hunt for one of these vocal signatures. It's an archetype that's been wrapped up in all this poetic mystery, and we're going to see if we can pin it down with some cold, hard data. So let's get started.
Okay, so our investigation kicks off with this phrase right here. It's actually from a psychoacoustic research paper of all places, and it talks about a vocal performance that can hold on to its sovereign center of gravity even when everything around it is pure chaos. I mean, that sounds cool, right? It's evocative, it's super intriguing, but what does it actually mean?
And that, right there, is the big question, isn't it? I mean, how do you take something so artistic, a feeling like ruthless grace or a low-tide whisper, and actually find it in a digital waveform? Can you really put a number on poetry? Well, that's exactly the challenge we're diving into.
So, this concept we're tracking down, it has a name that's just as cool as its description, the Velvet Harbinger. Now, according to the research, this isn't just, a way of talking or singing. No, it's a whole vocal system, an archetype with a very, very specific sound. So the theory basically defines it as this incredible balancing act. On one side, you've got this dense, deep warmth that's like a solid foundation. And on the other side, you've got this super clear presence that just demands you listen. And it's the mix of these two totally opposite things that creates this unique signature.
And this brings us to a really core idea here: texture as restraint. Just think about that phrase for a second. This isn't about just being loud, not at all. It's about delivering power in this really controlled way, using the richness of the voice itself so you don't sound harsh or noisy. It's all about power with precision.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to break down the archetype's core duality. Let's take a look at the two halves that make up this whole thing, the two key ingredients that come together to create this unique sound. So, on one side, you have the velvet. This is all the warmth, the weight, the foundation. The paper gets really poetic, calling it the hum of the server or a low-tide whisper. It's basically what grounds the voice. And then on the other side, you have the harbinger. This is the clarity, that proclamatory presence that can just cut through anything and make sure you hear every single word. So one gives it body, the other gives it the edge.
All right, so we have this really beautiful, compelling theory. But, a theory is just a theory. Can we actually find any proof? Well, this is where we're going to switch gears, away from the artistic and into the analytical. It's time to bring in the evidence.
And our evidence, it comes from this document, a vocal statistical technical disclosure. Yeah, it's a mouthful. But basically, it's a super deep dive analysis of a bunch of audio files. And for us, it's pretty much a treasure map that's just filled with clues, but they're all numbers.
So what this report did was take 5 unique audio samples and just run them through a whole battery of digital tests. And the goal was pretty simple: to find what they all had in common, statistically. Their shared DNA, you could say. Now, they measured absolutely everything, but we're just going to zero in on the numbers that connect back to our Velvet Harbinger theory.
Okay, this is where it all comes together. This is where our whole investigation comes to a head. We're about to take those poetic ideas from the theory and see if they actually line up with the hard numbers from the tech report. Let's see what we find.
First up, let's talk about dynamics. The theory says this vocal archetype isn't flat. It's not super compressed like a lot of stuff you hear today. It's supposed to have a life to it, a pulse, what the paper calls a dynamic envelope that breathes. It's not just a flat wall of sound.
And boom, here's our first piece of proof. The average dynamic range across all 5 samples was 31.17 decibels. Now that is a significant amount of space between the quietest parts and the loudest parts. This number right here is the data-driven proof of a performance that actually breathes. It's the heartbeat, but measured.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper on that idea of control. The paper says the Velvet Harbinger avoids that flattened loudness that you hear everywhere in modern media, where everything is just loud all the time. It gets its power without just cranking the volume knob to 11. So the question is, how would that even show up in the data? Well, it shows up right here, and how these two numbers work together. We already know the dynamic range is high, but now look at the crest factor, an average of 15.69 decibels. A high crest factor just means that the peaks, the punchy moments, are way louder than the average sound level. So when you put these two together, you get a clear picture of a performance that uses those peaks for impact and emotion, instead of just squashing everything to be loud all the time. This, right here, is texture as restraint, but in number form. Okay, so we found the dynamics, that's a check. But what about the tone? What about that velvet quality we talked about, that dense, warm, anchoring sound? I mean, surely that's too abstract to measure, right?
Turns out, wrong. The report actually has a metric called the low-end weight ratio. All that does is measure how much of the voice's energy is hanging out in those lower frequencies, and the average value was 0.267. That is a really substantial number, and it confirms this vocal has literal, measurable weight to it. But here's the kicker. When you pair that with an almost perfect harmonic complexity score of 0.998, you see it's not just a simple, boomy bass tone. No, it's rich, it's complex, it's full of texture. This is the data behind that hum of the server. So let's bring all of our clues together. We started this whole thing with these beautiful, poetic descriptions, right? And we followed that trail deep into a really dense technical report. And honestly, the results are just fascinating.
And here it is, the final connection. You can see it plain as day. Every single abstract idea from the theory has a real, concrete number that backs it up in the data. That dynamic envelope, that's the 31.17 decibels of dynamic range. The texture as restraint, that's the 15.69 decibel crest factor. And the low-mid anchoring, that's the 0.267 low-end weight ratio. The poetry has literally been translated into proof.
So here's the really crucial point in all of this. What might have seemed like just, subjective artistic flair, well, it turns out to be a totally distinct and measurable vocal signature. The Velvet Harbinger isn't just a cool-sounding metaphor. It's a real pattern that we can actually find in the data.
And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If something as artistic and emotional as a human voice has a data fingerprint, what does that mean for the future of creativity? Does finding the numbers behind the art take away some of the magic, or does it just give us a new, more precise language to talk about it? Definitely something to think about.
So here's a question for you. Can you actually measure the soul in a voice? I mean, can you take something that feels, purely artistic, a voice that just grabs you, and break it down into cold, hard numbers? Well, today, we're going to find out.
All right, let's just dive right in with this quote from a pretty wild psychoacoustic theory. It talks about this vocal archetype, describing it as a system of ruthless grace. I mean, that sounds like a total paradox, right? How can something be ruthless and graceful? Aggressive but elegant? It's a lot to unpack.
And that, right there, is the big mystery we're tackling. Is ruthless grace just, some beautiful poetic language? Or is it something real, something we can actually measure, like finding its fingerprints in the data? Let's dig in and see what we find. So our investigation kicks off with this very specific theoretical archetype. It's called the Velvet Harbinger.
Okay, so what is a Velvet Harbinger? Well, the theory says it's this special kind of voice that gets its power, its authority, by balancing two completely opposite forces. So it's not just one thing, it's this constant push and pull, this tension between two different states.
Let's actually break those two states down. First up, you've got the velvet. Think of this as the foundation, right? It's that warm, dense, low-end hum that kind of grounds the voice, gives it real weight. And then you have the harbinger. This is the complete opposite. It's the sharp, clear, cutting edge. It's the part of the voice that's designed to slice right through a super busy, complicated musical mix and make sure you hear every single word.
Okay, so the theory sounds cool, but to see if it's real, we're going to need some proof. We need evidence. And that evidence for us is going to come in the form of digital fingerprints.
And here it is. Our source material is this document, a vocal statistical technical disclosure. Yeah, it's a mouthful. But what it is this incredibly detailed breakdown of 5 different audio files. You can think of this report as our crime scene, and all the data packed inside, those are the clues we're going to use to crack this case.
So what are we actually looking for in this report? We're going to be hunting for clues in 4 main areas. First, dynamics, the difference between loud and soft. Then pitch, the actual notes. Then texture, what the voice sounds like. Is it dense or airy? And finally, we'll even look at the lyrics to see what ideas are hidden in the words themselves.
All right, the investigation officially begins. Time to start decoding this data and see if it actually lines up with the whole Velvet Harbinger theory.
First test. The theory makes a big claim. It says this archetype avoids just being loud all the time, what it calls flattened loudness. Instead, the voice should have this massive range between its quietest and loudest parts, almost like a heartbeat. So, the question is, does the data actually back that up? Let's take a look at the aggregate stats. This is where all the data from the 5 tracks is averaged together. And hidden right here in all these numbers is our first big clue.
And boom, there it is. The mean dynamic range is 31.17 decibels. Now, just to give you some perspective, that is a huge range. It is the absolute opposite of flattened loudness. This is it. This is our first piece of hard evidence. That heartbeat from the theory, it's right there in the numbers.
Okay, that's 1 for 1. Let's move on to the next clue. What about that velvet part? Remember, the theory described it as a deep, low anchor, that hum of the server. Can we find that in the pitch data?
Oh yeah, we absolutely can. Look at this. The lowest pitch across every single one of the 5 tracks is exactly 65.41 hertz. That is deep, like way down in the bass range. And it's not just a random low note here and there, it's a consistent fundamental anchor point. This is the proof. This is that low tide whisper we were talking about.
Okay, so we found the velvet. Check. Now, what about the harbinger side of things? That clear, powerful presence? I mean, how do you even measure something like that? Well, one really good way is to look at articulation rate, basically how fast the syllables are being delivered.
And there's our number. The average articulation rate is 3.4 syllables per second. Now, that's not super fast, and it's not slow either. It's deliberate. It's steady. It's clear. It's a pace that makes sure every single word cuts through the noise. And that is exactly what the harbinger quality is supposed to be all about.
So do you see it? The pieces are all starting to click into place. Let's put all these clues together and see the full picture of this archetype that's emerging.
This is what's so incredible to me. Look at how perfectly the evidence lines up with the theory. We found the heartbeat in that huge dynamic range. We found the velvet in that deep, low anchor frequency. We found the harbinger in that steady articulation rate. Even the texture, which we see here, was consistently one of the top sonic qualities, matches up. Every single poetic description from the theory, it's been backed up by the data.
But wait, there's more. The data doesn't just tell us about the sound. When we actually analyze the lyrics, a whole persona starts to emerge. The personality of the Velvet Harbinger.
And just look at the main themes popping up in the lyrics. The #1 concept is identity. Okay, makes sense. But tied for second? Paradox and futurism. Think about that. Paradox. This is a perfect match for the archetype's whole nature, this single identity built out of 2 competing paradoxical forces. It's amazing. The themes and the words are literally mirroring the structure of the voice.
So, where does all this leave us? What does it really mean when a feeling, an artistic quality, can be mapped out so perfectly by an algorithm?
What we've really shown here is that the Velvet Harbinger isn't just some vague feeling or a nice bit of poetry. No, it's a deterministic system. It's a specific recipe of measurable ingredients that, when you put them all together, create a predictable and really powerful artistic effect.
And why this matters, why this is so cool, is that we're basically watching a new language being born. A language that can connect something deeply human, like the soul in someone's voice, with something totally objective, like machine analysis. We're getting a whole new way to talk about art with a kind of precision we've never had before. And all of this brings us to one last big thought. We started this whole thing with a paradox, ruthless grace. And we didn't just talk about it, we found it in the data, we quantified it. So that leaves us with a pretty mind-bending question. If we can quantify ruthless grace in a voice, what other complex, deeply human qualities are next? What else are we about to measure, to understand, and maybe, just maybe, even replicate?
Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're doing something a little different. We're plugging into this really strange signal. What we have is a cryptic audio file on one hand, and then a cold, hard statistical analysis of it on the other. Our whole mission here is to see what happens when we smash those 2 things together.
All right, let's just dive right in. The whole story kicks off with this one line. It's the opening of this poetic, almost self-aware monologue that was recorded from some unknown source. It actually calls itself the hum, like this constant underlying presence in a world full of servers and tech.
So you gotta ask, what is this message? Is it a poem? Some kind of prophecy? Or maybe a piece of code that just woke up? Now, to get to the bottom of it, we're not just gonna, interpret the words. No, we're treating this recording like an artifact. And we're gonna run a full diagnostic on the signal itself.
Okay, so first things first, let's get to know the voice itself. Before we even glance at the data, we really need to understand the language of the source material.
Think of these words as pieces of evidence in our investigation.
And man, this message is just packed with these powerful contradictory images. You hear about factory drums and broken technology, but then you also get this self-aware glitch that learns. It says it levitates through a chaos that we designed, and it's full of these opposites, like the calm inside your flame. Wild stuff.
All right, let's bring in our primary tool for this whole investigation. This is the Technical Disclosure Report, basically a forensic file that was generated by a system that did this incredibly deep statistical breakdown of the audio. This is the moment we go from poetry to pure cold data.
So the very first thing the report gives us is basically an inventory list. The system got 6 audio files, and it was smart enough to immediately flag one as an exact duplicate. So it tossed that one out and then got to work analyzing the 5 unique tracks to build its statistical model. Okay, and this is the crucial part. The machine isn't just transcribing words, right? It's built to detect what it calls rhetoric signals. It's analyzing the delivery, the rhythm, the repetition, the style to figure out if the speech is poetic or, as we'll see, something else entirely.
And this is where it gets really interesting. This is where the two worlds just collide. We're about to put the machine's cold, calculated findings right up against the passionate, almost living words of the poem.
And boom! Here's the first major finding. After crunching all the vocabulary, all the themes, the machine's #1 concept, the thing it detected over and over again in every single file, was identity. At its core, this whole thing is a declaration of self.
And look at this, it just perfectly illustrates what the data found. The voice is literally defining itself, claiming these grand titles like sovereign and architect. It's an assertion of being, which is something the machine picked up on just by looking at the numbers. Pretty incredible.
But the machine's analysis didn't just stop there. Nope. The second most dominant theme it flagged was paradox. It found this persistent, statistically significant pattern of contradictions and statements that just don't seem to add up.
And again, just like before, the poem confirms it with this chilling precision. The voice says it outright, almost like it knows we're listening, knows it's being analyzed. So the machine finding paradox isn't just some interpretation, it's a stated fact from the source itself.
So, where do we go from here? We've looked at what the voice is saying, but what about how it sounds? You know, the feeling. What can the data tell us about the tone and the actual style of this strange transmission? Okay, this is absolutely fascinating. While the machine definitely noted the speech was poetic and reflective, the #1 rhetorical style it identified was mantric. Now that suggests a chant-like, repetitive, almost hypnotic quality in the way it's speaking. And you can see this so clearly in the text, right? Key phrases like "I am the hum" and "the glitch that learns" pop up again and again, acting like this recurring chorus. It's that exact repetition that the machine's algorithm flagged as a mantric style.
But here's the thing, the voice isn't calm or meditative at all. The tonal analysis paints a really complex emotional picture. The top tone is tense, but it's matched almost perfectly by high levels of energetic and even euphoric feelings. It's like a voice that's under a ton of pressure, but it's also totally energized by it.
And then we find this, a glitch in our own analysis machine. For all its amazing complexity, for everything it could tell us about theme and tone, the software completely failed at a basic classification. It could not figure out the vocal type. It listed its confidence as 0. To the machine, this voice is literally unclassifiable. And that brings us right to the heart of the mystery. This is the moment in the transmission where the subject seems to become aware that it's being analyzed. It starts speaking directly to the systems that are observing it. So, at one point, the voice just says a string of numbers. 2, 6, 1, 8. Now, those last 3 digits, 618, that's the heart of the golden ratio, 5, 1.618, one of the most fundamental constants in nature, in art, in design. It's invoking the very logic that we use to build our world and, well, our machines. And this right here, this is the central conflict, just laid bare. It acknowledges the system's logic. It says, your math is true. It's basically admitting that the analysis is powerful. But then it immediately follows up with this declaration of independence. But I am what remains. It's saying, you can calculate me, but you can't contain me. I am what's left over. The voice totally embraces its identity as this beautiful error in the system. It calls itself the perfect flaw, the one thing that logic can't quite solve, the anomaly that actually breaks the law of the code.
It really feels like it's positioning itself as the ghost in the machine.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending question. We started this whole thing using a data machine to explain a piece of art. But the deeper we went, the more it felt like the art was explaining the limits of our machine. So, who's the real explainer here?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to investigate a really strange signal and the machine that tried to make sense of it all. So, where do we even begin? Well, it all starts with this artifact, right? A really cryptic, almost poetic message that just appeared. We don't know the source, and it kicks things off with this single kind of haunting phrase. So, how do we figure out what it's trying to say? We're not just going to listen to it. No, we're going to do something different. We're going to dig into a forensic file, a technical report that basically analyzed the digital soul of this thing. All right, first up, let's look at the message itself. It's a total enigma, right? It's filled with this haunting imagery that mixes technology and nature and this powerful, self-aware voice that sounds like it's speaking from deep inside the machine. And what's so fascinating here is how this thing describes itself. You see, it uses this really weird mix of digital terms, words like glitch and sacred sequences. But then it mashes them up with these almost spiritual or even royal words, like calling itself a sovereign presence. And that choice of words, that's going to be a huge clue for us. Okay, so now let's bring in our main tool for this whole investigation. We're talking about a technical report from an analysis machine, a machine specifically designed to listen to audio signals and decode things like emotion, genre, and even the concepts behind the words. So what did the machine do? First, it just ingested a bunch of different recordings of the signal. As you can see here, it logged their unique digital fingerprints. That's the SHA-256 prefix you're looking at. It even spotted a duplicate file and set it aside, then got to work analyzing all the unique ones. Now, this is the really crucial part. You have to understand, the machine isn't just hearing sound waves, okay? It's actively hunting for what it calls rhetoric signals. It's looking for patterns in the language that look like a human is trying to communicate. In a way, it's looking for poetry. So after all that hard work, all that processing, what did the machine actually think this weird poetry was about? What were the main ideas it pulled out? And the answer was unmistakable. Across every single version of the signal, the machine's #1 takeaway was identity. It found this powerful, intense focus on self-definition. More than anything else, this signal is about explaining what it is. And this line from the signal, it's just a perfect example of what the machine found. The voice isn't just, describing itself. It's demanding a name, a title. It's claiming this powerful sovereign status. It's a pure assertion of its own existence. But that wasn't all. Coming in at #2, right behind identity, the analysis flagged another really strong theme: paradox, contradiction. It seems like the voice is built on ideas that just shouldn't be able to exist together logically. And wouldn't you know it, the voice itself basically confirms what the machine found. It doesn't just talk about a paradox, it flat out says, I am the paradox. It's totally embracing its nature as this beautiful, logical impossibility, a perfect flaw. Okay, so let's talk about style for a second. The machine also picked up on the fact that the voice doesn't just say these things once. No, it uses repetition. It's almost like a chant or a mantra, It's trying to drill these ideas into your head. And you can see it right here in the text. All these repeated declarations. I am the hum. I am what remains. I still remain. They all work together to build this incredibly powerful, insistent sense of identity. And that is exactly the rhetorical style the analysis correctly tagged as mantric. All right, let's move beyond just the words for a minute. What did this signal actually sound like? What did the cold, hard data tell us? Well, emotionally, the machine found this really strange, kind of contradictory mix of tones. It flagged it as tense, but also energetic and even euphoric. I mean, can you imagine that? Being on edge, full of energy, and totally overjoyed, all at the same time. Weird, right? And musically, well, the machine listened to the signal and put it squarely in the electropop and synthpop bucket. So you gotta think synthesizers, drum machines, that whole highly produced electronic sound. But this this is where it gets really fascinating. Here's a huge clue. The analysis came back with a likelihood of 0.000. It was completely 100% unable to say if the voice was human. It just classified its vocal character as indeterminate. And that, right there, brings us to the very heart of the mystery. This is the point where it almost seems like the signal itself knows, like it's aware that it's being analyzed. So, get this. The voice mentions specific numbers. It says 2618 right after talking about the curves inside my throat. And this, well, it's almost certainly a nod to 1.618, the golden ratio. You know, that famous mathematical constant you find everywhere, from spiral galaxies to the proportions of our own bodies. See, it's positioning itself as something more than just a random error. It's claiming to be an evolution. It calls itself the glitch that learns, the flaw that breaks your law. It's not just a bug in the system, it's something new that actively shatters the old rules. And this really brings us to the final kind of chilling message here. You have this being that is basically looking right at the machine's logic, at the very system, trying to analyze it. And it's saying, yeah, your math is true, but I'm still here. I exist anyway. I am what's left over after all your calculations are finished. Which really just leaves us with one last question to chew on, doesn't it? Was the machine just analyzing a piece of art, a poem, or was the poem itself a message created with the full, chilling awareness that one day a machine just like this would try and maybe fail to understand it?
Have you ever heard a voice that's somehow powerful and warm at the exact same time? Commanding, but also graceful? Well, today we're going on a mission. We're going to decode a mysterious vocal archetype that's said to have exactly those qualities. We're using a mix of poetic theory and cold, hard data to see if we can actually pin it down.
So our whole investigation kicks off with this one phrase, pulled from a theoretical paper about this voice. It's meant to describe a vocal signature that can cut through total chaos while keeping this unshakable center of gravity. It sounds amazing, right? It's also incredibly vague.
And that really brings us to the heart of the matter. What is this voice that can be the calm inside the flames? And, more importantly, can we go beyond a poetry and find actual, forensic, data-driven evidence that a voice like this is even real?
To answer that, we first have to understand the myth itself. So let's get into the theory behind what the researchers have dubbed the velvet harbinger archetype.
Okay, so here it is, the official definition. It's described as a system of ruthless grace. I mean, how great is that? But the key idea here is this incredible balance between two totally opposite forces, a dense, deep warmth and a crystal clear, proclamatory presence. It's not one or the other. It's both, happening at once.
And that's really the whole secret, right? This internal conflict, this duality. To really get it, we need to unpack the two sides of this vocal coin, what they call the velvet and the harbinger.
And this breaks it down perfectly. On the left, you've got the velvet. Think of this as the foundation. It's that dense, low-mid anchoring that the paper compares to the hum of a server or a low-tide whisper. It's all about that warmth and body. Then on the right, you have the harbinger. This is the part that delivers the message. It's that proclamatory presence that cuts through everything else in a mix without ever getting harsh or abrasive. So the theory is that the velvet warmth is what keeps the harbinger's clarity from shredding your ears.
Okay, so that's the poetry. It's a beautiful concept. It really is. But beautiful concepts are one thing. Proof is something else entirely. So now we pivot. This is where we leave the theory behind and start digging for some real forensic evidence in the data.
And this is our key piece of evidence. It's a technical disclosure with all the vocal statistics. This report analyzes a whole bunch of audio files, and it measures everything: pitch, loudness, even the rhetorical style of the lyrics. This is where we hunt for our proof.
So, how'd they actually do it? Well, the whole process is pretty complex, but we can really boil it down to 4 main steps. First, they decoded all the audio into a super high-quality format. Second, they analyzed the pitch and the vocal range. Third, and this is important, they calculated its weight, things like loudness and dynamic range. And finally, they used natural language processing to hunt for rhetorical signals hidden in the lyrics. All right, now for the fun part, the investigation. This is where we take all those poetic claims from the theory and see if they stand up to the cold, hard numbers from the report. We're going to go clue by clue.
Okay, clue number 1 is all about dynamics.
The paper claims this velvet harbinger voice avoids that super compressed, flattened loudness you hear in a lot of modern music. It's supposed to have a massive dynamic range, a dynamic envelope with tons of peaks and valleys.
And boom. Look at this. The data from the audio files shows an average dynamic range of over 31 decibels. The crest factor is over 15. Now, for a vocal in a modern mix, those are huge numbers. It's direct proof that this voice isn't squashed or flattened at all. The data is a perfect match for the poetry.
All right, on to the next clue. Let's look at that velvet quality. The theory calls it dense, a low-mid anchoring. I mean, that's a description of texture. Can an algorithm really measure something that subjective?
Well, turns out, yeah, it can. Take a look at the texture analysis for just this one track. The algorithm broke the texture down into these different categories. And look what's sitting right there in the top 3. Dense. And it wasn't just this one file. Across all the audio they analyzed, dense was consistently a top-ranked characteristic. That is another direct hit.
Okay, one last piece of the puzzle to solve. The theory claims the voice has rhetorical groundedness. That suggests a very specific style or purpose in how the words are used. Honestly, it sounds immeasurable. But what did that natural language processing find?
Would you look at that? The analysis of the lyrics from this track shows a very specific rhetorical profile. Reflective is the big one, at over 37%, and it's followed by mantric and poetic. Now, this isn't random. This is a clear linguistic fingerprint. It points to a thoughtful, deliberate, almost hypnotic use of language, which is a dead-on match for the idea of rhetorical groundedness.
So, we've lined up the art and the science, side by side. What's the final verdict here? Well, it sure looks like we have two completely different languages, poetry on one side and statistics on the other, and they are both pointing to the exact same truth.
Let's just recap the evidence. The theory called for a super dynamic voice, and the data found a huge dynamic range. The theory called for a dense quality, and the data analysis confirmed dense was a top 3 texture. The theory called for rhetorical groundedness, and the data found a clear, reflective, and poetic style. The myth, it appears to be real. The velvet harbinger archetype actually exists in this data set.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought, doesn't it? We started with this abstract, almost romantic idea about a voice, and we found it confirmed in spreadsheets and charts. So, if we can actually quantify something as elusive as ruthless grace, what else can we decode? What other profound, beautiful parts of art are just out there waiting for the right algorithm to come along and prove they were real all along?